This is Dirshu Mishnah Berurah here, beginning Siman Bees, Sif Aleph through Sif Hey, up until Sif Vav. And Siman Bees is titled, and the titles themselves are very interesting. Were written by the Baal Machaber, the Shulchan Aruch himself, Arizif Kairoi. Din Levishas Begadim. We're going to discuss getting dressed, how one is supposed to get dressed like a Yid, the halachic ramifications of getting dressed. So says the Machaber in Sif Aleph, Lo Yilbash Chalukai. One should not put on his shirt, his undershirt more particularly, miyushav, sitting down. Everyone's wondering, why not? We'll get there in a moment. Ella yikach haluka, you should take your undershirt. V'yachlis by roishe, put your head in it. Uzuraisav in your arm. Ba'idenu shaychev, while you're still lying down. V'nimsa, now we're going to figure out what's going on over here, and it comes out, keshayok, when you get up, shumachusi, you're covered. So what's going on over here is, obviously we have someone who is sleeping, and he's not wearing any clothing. He's not wearing pajamas, he's wearing nothing, so he's under his blanket. If he sits up, and he puts on his undershirt, what's going to happen? He's going to be bare, he's going to be undressed, and this of course is halacha, piggybacks off of that which we saw in the beginning of Siman Aleph of Shvisi Hashem, the Negdi Tamid, and this is where we're going to see that Hashem is everywhere. There's a concept of sneas, of modesty, not only by women, but by men as well, because God is there, you have to be modest. So one should not sit up without any clothing on and put on his undershirt. Rather, he should do it while he's lying down. Now, more particularly, it's not just that by putting on your undershirt, you're revealing the upper half of your body. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Sivkat and Aleph Miyushav. Why should you not do this? The Mishnah Berurah explains, because for sure, Yiskale Gufa, you can reveal your body, and Vadim Zarech Lisnaik B'tznias, person has to be modest, Ubaisha, and he has to be with baishas, he has to be with embarrassment, literally. He has to be careful of that which he appears. Levnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Even when it's nighttime, the innermost sanctums of your house. Hashem is everywhere. And everything in front of God is like daytime. So you have to be careful always how you dress and how you act. One has to be careful, Tamid, constantly, due to this reason. If not for a need, which is an important line in the Mishnah Berurah, if not for a need, you shouldn't just needlessly reveal your body. Even a little bit. Whatever is normal to be covered, La'ilam, generally covered with clothing. Allowed to reveal your arms until the elbows and your shirt until the collarbone. Adkan. This is calling about your socks. Your socks you should even take off underneath your covers. Now, no one should get nervous. In a moment, we'll swing over to the Dirshu who will quote us Ramesha, who will make this a bit more contemporary. But the Mishnah Berurah says, even your socks, take off under your covers. So you should not reveal your legs. Your legs are always covered, which of course is a bit of a revealing fact that if someone would nowadays not do that, it's going to be different. You don't walk barefoot even in the summer. Is anything similar to this? Unless if it's impossible, then it's going to be allowed. Which of course as well shows us the level of forbiddance, or one shouldn't do this. And even in the bathhouse, that people go there undressed. There's no other way to do it. That's not britos. If the bathhouse is a place to be undressed, you're allowed to. Similarly, when you're bathing in the river, it's similar like this. But when you're bathing in the river, be careful. To get undressed and redressed close to the river. You don't want to just walk around the whole beach undressed. So it's close to the river, you get undressed and redressed. So you do not walk around with your body revealed for no reason. You don't even have to cover your erva when you're going down to the river. And not only that, says the Mishnah Berurah, if you cover over your erva, and these halachas are probably more commonly relevant when one goes to the mikvah, because that's generally nowadays a place one would be walking around undressed. Says the Mishnah Berurah, if you cover your erva near kilu boish, Chayish. Sounds like you're embarrassed, B'davar. Sounds like you're covering over your Makamila. You don't want everyone to see that you're a Yid. Ukeilu Kaifer b'bris Avraham Avinu. You're being a Kaifer in the bris of Avraham Avinu. What says Mishnah Berurah? That's when you're going down to the river, to the mikvah. When you're coming back up, and now you're walking facing the people. Shebanav Klabe'am, that you're facing people. The first white line in the Mishnah Berurah. Yishcha, you should bend over a little bit. Yasimata, can I get a vasa? You put your hand over your arva lechaseise to cover it. Ubelvad, but be careful. Shlayigaba, don't touch it. Gimel. As we'll see in Siman Gimel, you always have to be careful not to touch the makam erva, etc. So going down to the river, no concerns. Coming up, you're facing the people. Now you have to be a bit more tznius. You're in a river, you're in a public area, and therefore you have to be a bit more tznius. And the poskim obviously point out, you saw a clear contrast that by the bathhouse, he didn't say anything about this. He said you're allowed to do what you need to do over the river differently. The obvious difference being the river is a public area and the bathhouse is not. Isa b'shas. The shirt of a Talmud Chacham, kol she'in b'sari nearest mitachtav, you don't see your flesh underneath. And this is referring to, and now we're starting to see that when we talk about a shirt or an undershirt, and that's really the same thing back from the beginning of this sif, we're talking about something like a long nightgown. So we have this long nightgown, and maybe we should have spoken about this right at the beginning, when we said that you got to put it on sitting, because if not, what's going to happen? And the Mishnah Berurah says, because you're going to be revealed. The point is, you're talking about a nightgown, and you're not wearing any clothing. So if you get out of bed, then hello, you're wearing no clothing. So rather you should put it on. The Mishnah Berurah says lying down to make sure your body gets covered. And now the Mishnah Berurah is continuing in the second white line and teaching us that a Talmud Chacham's nightgown, you want to make sure that your flesh is not seen. It goes all the way to the bottom, all the way to the floor. But he continues, we're not careful about this. Why? Everyone walks around with socks, and therefore there is no concern. Before we continue to Sif Beis, let's see one more Mishnah Berurah. Kisha Yakum is going. Yes, Mishnah Yakum is going on this sif. What did the Machaber say? The Machaber says you should put on your nightgown while you're still lying down. And it's like Kisha Yakum, when you get up, you're going to be covered up. So says the Mishnah Berurah, Kisha Yakum Ratza Laimar, Kisha Yakum Yotze Machmas Kisis Adina. You come out of your covers. Shemunach Sham Aram. You don't want, like we just explained, you don't want to be lying there without any clothing. Kisha Pasha Chaluka Yata. Take a mechusa. So if you put on the nightgown lying down, then as soon as you get up, you're going to be covered up. Kiba chaluka al kol gufa, because as you get up, the nightgown will cover your entire body. Me'atzmai on its own. Vayin lekmantim reish lametes base. Lenyan pshitas achalik, how you take off your shirt, we're going to discuss then. And now, actually, before the Mishnah Berurah is about to segue into other halachas, it's very important to take a moment to swing over to Dirshu over here, and says the Dirshu in this whole halacha of how much your body has to be covered, etc. So says the Dirshu in note number 1 over here, the geder in how you're allowed to be dressed. So the Dirshu goes to Ramesha Feinstein in Yardei Chil Gimel Siman Mem Zayin. There's also Ramesha in Siman Samaches, and Ramesha says basically it goes by the norms of the place. That if it's a norm of the place to walk around to walk around barefoot, for example, then you're allowed to walk around barefoot. And he says in very hot areas that is the minhag, then one is allowed to do that. And it goes by, each place is subjective. Obviously, what's normal to walk around in the street might be different what's normal to walk around in your house, etc. And of course, this Ramesha is the answer why one could halachically wear shorts, if that's for him what's normal. And Ramesha throws in an important line, as we're going to highlight over here, how are you going to be prepared to be seen in front of big people? Because let's remember, the halacha here is Shvisi Hashem L'negdi Tamid. The halacha here is God sees you always. So maybe you shouldn't be wearing shorts. Maybe you shouldn't be wearing an undershirt and no shirt on top of it. So the answer is, what would you personally be comfortable being seen in? It could be in your own house. If someone knocks on the door, would you answer the door that way? If the answer is yes, that means you're not concerned with someone, an Ashim Gedalim, the Rav, or someone Chashiv, doesn't have to be necessarily the Rav. So a Chashiv coming to your door, you wouldn't be concerned. Then that is the way you're allowed to be dressed within your house. But if not, then not. And obviously this has to go with how much clothing you're allowed to wear, etc. And now we continue in Dirshu on number 3, points out a very similar idea for Ramesha. Like we pointed out, that in the merchatz, in the bathhouse, there's no covet at all, and therefore there's no din of sneas at all, and therefore you're allowed to be undressed in that area. And similarly, Ramesha makes this contemporary. Nowadays in the bathroom is going to be the same thing, and because of that, says Ramesha Feinstein, the most appropriate place to be getting dressed, when one has to get fully undressed to fully dressed, and someone's going to be standing there naked, is going to be in the bathroom, because the bathroom is a place where it is normal to be undressed, or some people maybe it's a walk-in closet, or something like that, and that would be the most lechatchila. But what's important over here is, Dirshu doesn't quote this, but the Ramesha Feinstein in Yordei Chel Gimel Siman Samach says that all of these halachas are not isurim. They're midas the chasidus. They're pious acts. It's the right way to act. But we have to take everything now with a grain of salt. We have to realize these aren't proper isurim, but rather these are the right way to act, and they are. But therefore, one has to be aware of where he is holding and where the halacha is holding, and how much he has to be careful and make himself crazy, we'll call, about these type of halachas. But now we continue in the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Beis, in which he tells a very incredible halacha. We're in the fourth line of the wide lines of the Mishnah Berurah. If someone puts his clothing under his head when he sleeps, for example, it sounds like under your pillow, you're going to forget your Torah. If you put something that separates between your head and the clothing, ink paid up. You don't have to be worried about it. And they bring a raya for all those who learned Daf Yomi, the Gemara in Yoma. We learned that the Kaihanim used to sleep and they used to put their clothing under their head as a pillow. And they want to bring a raya that the Kaihanim would put something separating between their head and the clothing. And that's the reason why it's not a problem, because there's something separating. But if not, it is a serious problem. The Dirshu will quote numerous cases, but let's get there in a moment. The Mishnah Berurah continues, you should have put on two articles of clothing at the same time. That also causes you to forget your Torah. A third case, if you read the inscription on a tombstone, you stare and you gaze with also causes you to forget your learning. Look over there how to get back your learning. So let's start over here. Dirshu note number 5 discusses what does it mean that you put your clothing under your head. He quotes the Salmas Chaim that he says it's only if you're ruggle. You do it all the time. If it happens one time, you don't have to be concerned. And that's the raya he brings from the Kaihanim. We said the other raya, maybe that there's something in between, which means a pillow would not be a problem if you go with that understanding. Whereas Chaim Kanievsky says, no, even if it happens at a happenstance, it's still a problem. And he explains the Kaihanim, as we go into the next column on the Dirshu, is V'shemer mitzvah l'yeda davara. The Kaihanim were doing a mitzvah, that's why they did not have to be concerned. Now, he also quotes an interesting case. What if it's not your clothing? And on that, the Salmas Chaim, interestingly enough, says it doesn't cause you to forget your Torah. Obviously, these are Kabbalistic inyanim, and not something we could try to explain. And we'll just point out one interesting case he doesn't bring here. What about your sleeve? You go to sleep on the stender, you go to sleep on the table, you fall asleep. Or, you put your hoodie on your head and you go to sleep. Is that called sleeping on your clothing? And the Sefer Shmir Saguf Nefesh, who discusses these inyanim, says no, your clothing that you're wearing is part of your body, so you do not have to be concerned with that. Then we continue in Dirshu note number 7 that we discuss is putting on two articles of clothing at once. And first he quotes, what about taking off two articles of clothing, which is very common. People take off, whatever, everyone does their own thing. People take off two articles of clothing often at the same time. And Chaim Kanievsky says one should be careful about that. But others say that it's not something one has to be careful about. And Rav Zalman Auerbach says you only have to be nervous that which is explicit. So don't worry about getting undressed, taking off two articles of clothing at once. Getting dressed is the problem. Now, what's a very common case? Dirshu note number 8 points out putting on your hat with your kippah, with your yarmulke. Because sometimes you take off the hat, the yarmulke is stuck. Some people put it in explicitly that way. So he quotes Chaim Pelagi that says it's not a right thing to do. Why? Because you to forget your Torah. And therefore, one should be careful when it comes to putting on rubbers on your shoes. Sometimes you take off the shoes and the rubbers, the galoshes they call them, the ardalim, says their shoe, are still stuck to your shoe. Rav Yasha says, don't worry about that. It's not a rubber, it's not called a garment, and you don't have to be concerned with that at all, and therefore one could put on the rubbers and the shoes all at once. But everything else, all other clothing, one should certainly be careful with. And Dirshu note number 9 continues that what if you're not careful with this? You put on the hat with the yarmulke, you put on your shirt and your sweater at once. Is it an isser? It says it cause you forget your Torah. Does that make it an isser? So the Sefer Chasidim says you're not chayiv, and Rechaim Kanievsky says that it's not an isser derabanan. Why? Because it's not for sure that you're going to forget your Torah. It's not like the case. Listen to Rechaim Kanievsky. It's not like the case that when you learn and you don't chazer. There the Gemara says, and the Mishnah and Avi says mischayiv ben avshay. Because if you don't chazer, you don't review your Torah, you're for sure going to learn it, and that's a terrible thing. This is not as bad. So it's definitely something that one should be careful with, but it's not at the same level. And he quotes other opinions here as well. It's a big machlokes. Whether it's that level, you're for sure going to forget your learning. And then we're going to conclude this segment with one important halacha. He talks about what about women? It's a big machlokes over here. And what about children? And the reason why this is very nageya is because maybe kids don't have this halacha of kasha l'shicha because they're not one that has to remember their Torah. And Rav Chaim Kanievsky over here says that it's appropriate, leaning ketanim, even though they don't have to learn, you still should be careful because they get into the nature of forgetting their Torah. I don't know what that means, but it's definitely something one should keep in mind. And kids, it is very common, to get them undressed more than redressed. But undressed, we said, if Shem Zalman says don't be nervous about it, it's more redressed. And actually, we have to continue one more page here in the Dirshu, very important. This is note number 10. Anyone who's using this forum, this is in the back. The Miluim are in the back of the Sefer. So in the back of the Sefer, note number 10, he says, what about reading the tombstone? Many people do that. So numerous Hatirim over here. Number one is it's talking about only if you read it with your mouth, not reading it with your eyes, that's okay. Chai Kanievsky says maybe that's okay. Number two is it depends what type of letters are on the gravestone. It's only referring to letters that are sticking out. But if they're chiseled into the tombstone, then Rav Chaim says that's not a problem. Similarly, if it's printed on the tombstone, Rav Chaim says that's as well not a problem. And the last thing over here is the Dirshu quotes another case of kasha l'shicha is wiping your hands, your wet hands on your clothing. I'm going to give Yoda b'chalukai, which is a Magen Avram we're going to get to in Siman Kuf Nemches that says you forget your learning. But we'll just conclude this part by quoting Rav Elyashiv that says it's only referring to after Netilas Yadayim to eat. So after you wash your hands for bread, then don't wipe your hands on your shirt. But other types of netila is not something you have to be concerned about, and as well, it's also specifically the chalukah, your shirt, your jacket, not necessarily your pants. It's getting late, so let's go back and let's finish up today's shir with Sif Beis through Hey. Says Sif Beis, Al Yomer Ini B'Chadir Chadar Miraya. Don't say I'm in my private quarters. Who sees me? Miraini. Ki Hakadosh Baruch Hu Malikal Eretz Kevoda. Hashem fills up the entire world. And Sif Gimel says the Mechaber Yedakte B'Chalukah L'Lav Shekedarkai. Should be careful with your clothing to always wear it. Shaloi Lahapei Chapanimi, not inside out. Lachotz. Don't wear your clothes inside out. We're just going to learn all the machabers here, and then we'll take the last few Mishnah Berurahs. Says the machaber in Sifdalit, Yinal Minal Yamin Tchila, put on your right foot first. V'lo yikshenu, don't tie it. Then put on your left foot, and then tie it. You put on your right, you put on your left, you tie your right. Says the Ramah, we don't have laces. So you just put on the right one first, and you don't have to be concerned. And we conclude with Sefei says, when you take off your shoes, you take off your left shoe first. So says the Mishnah Berurah over here in Sif Katan Gimel, your shirt is under all your clothing, and maybe it's an undershirt. You should not wear it inside out. Why not? So it says the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot and Gimel, v'yira tfiros hamegunos. It's going to see the stitches. V'amri v'imri acholek, and the hem of the shirt. V'yiskane be'inei abriyos. So it's obviously referring something that at some level it's seen. And from here, some places speak out that undergarments, maybe it's not something one has to be concerned if they're inside out. But Talmidei Chachamim, I think Rav Chaim says, should always be concerned. V'imloi nizar, if you're not careful, v'hafach, and the clothing is inside out. Im tamil chachamu sarach levashta, you got to take it off. V'lachsa put on normally. You don't want people to look at you with distaste and what's this person wearing inside out clothing? No, you don't have to be concerned. Uletfila, and for davening, hafilu kol adam, you're talking to the Creator, you're talking to God. Sar lefashta, you got to take off the inside out. Shar lelav shegedarka, and wear normally. Sharai az lahadir begadav gemur simsa amayalef. As you're standing in front of God, you want to be careful with that which you're wearing. And the Mishnah Berurah continues, Tov shasib shnei sidei amalbush biyad yamini. You should take, whenever you're putting on a garment, put both of them in the right hand. But yolbash hayamin, and then put the right hand in first. V'achachasmal v'yechavin, and have a kavana ki akol nichlal b'yamin. Everything goes the right first. Mini yamin balasmal, then the left. Kasva Rambam malbush tamachacham. Yeah, malbush no v'naki. You should have nice clothing. V'aser loishimsa b'gad kesem. Can have dirt on your clothing, or shamnunis, or fat, chitben, anything like that. V'lo yolbash lo malbush sarim. But be careful, don't wear haughty clothing. Sha'akol mistaklim b'em. Everyone looks at them. V'lo malbush aniyim, but not pauper clothing. Shemavazes levusha, that you shouldn't embarrass your clothing. El begodim beinoni, normal, regular clothing done that are nice. Ayin sham oid. Sif Dalet says Mishnah Berurah, yamin right. Shkein masinu b'tayir she'amin chashav tamid. The right is always more chashav. Leaning bayin yad v'regel by matayir, etc. Chol advarim shemakdina yamin, the small. The right always comes first. So you put on the right shoe first. We just said you put your right hand in the garment first, etc. V'ikashrenu, when you tie it. Then in kashir, when it comes to tying, matinu she'atayir ninna chashiva sel small. The tying goes left first. Because that's when you tie your tefillin, you tie the left first, left hand. Uban pilish alev is some sort of silk shoe. Ein tzarich lahaktim, some sort of slipper, small like sheer. You don't have to tie the left first because it's only a din in leather. Veiter yad sheminiach tefillin biyamin shekol adam. If you're a lefty, that you put your tefillin on the right hand, yaktim yamin gam like shira. Then when you tie, you should tie the right first. So this is a very large machlekes in when it comes to lefties, what they do exactly. The Mishnah Berurah over here says that when it comes to tying, since they always tie it on the right, they should tie their right first. Yamin tchila, you should put on the right first. V'gamin is damage al small. Let's say the left comes first. Yamtin, you should wait at yamin till you get the right one. When you wash, same thing. V'sach, and you bathe and you anoint yourself. Yamin tchila, the right always comes first. V'sach al gufa, you're taking a bath, a shower. Reish tchila, first comes your head. V'neishu melech al kol evarim. I am a dark Moshe. So the one cloud we just learned, and we'll see one more Dirshu. There's a lot of Dirshu over here, but it's getting late. Is that, how does it work? The right goes first always. Right shoe, then left shoe. Right hand of your garment. Right always first. And the Mishnah Berurah over here says, what about Dirshu note number 12 says, what about a lefty when he gets dressed? So Rav Chaim Kanievsky says, no, he still does the right first because it's Al-Pi Kabbalah. And then he says, you shouldn't have fat in your clothing. It's only a liquid. That's number 13. Number 14 says that when it comes to tying them, what says the Dirshu note number 14? Let's say you have a shoe without any laces, but what do you have? You have scotch, you have Velcro or something like that. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky says that's called the tying. It's not a din of tying, it's a fastening. So the left shoe, you should do the Velcro first as well, because that's how you tie your tefillin. No, number 15, and he says, even though a woman who does not put on tefillin, Rishon Zalman says she's still shetinol v'tiksha shel yamin techila, which is interesting. Rishon Zalman learns that she should tie her right shoe first. I don't know why, I have a feeling that girls do just like guys this one, but that's what Rishon Zalman says. Again, your right comes first, and we're going to conclude today. There's more Dirshu with a nice picture over here. If anyone was wondering, what did the Mishnah Berurah meant that when he said that when you put on a garment, you hold them both in the right hand? So you see over here, very nice, that is all Al-Pi Kabbalah. But then when you take your jacket, you're supposed to hold it in your right hand, both sides in the right, and then swing it to the left, put on the right, and then put on the left. And with this picture, you can think back to the last time you saw putting on a jacket, and you'll probably notice that's the way that he did it. And then Dirshu note number 17 and 18, we'll just talk about 18 over here. He says, what about if you're taking off your shoes to put them on for a mitzvah? He quotes over here, for example, like Berchas Kayhanim, he says, then you should take off the right first, not like the Machaber said, you should take off the left first. The reason being, because since you're going to go straight into a mitzvah, you take off the right first. Many halachos. Hopefully we'll put out a shir as well in the Chazara. A wonderful week of Mishnah Berurah. Next week, God willing, we're going to try to get the shirim up a little bit earlier the night before for all those that are asking.